Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today in our debate on global supply chains, digital tools between empowerment and control. With me on stage is Akhil. Akhil is a representative of the Migrant Forum Asia. And the Migrant Forum Asia is a network of trade unions, associations, and NGOs that focus on the rights of migrant workers in Southeast Asia. Now I can hear myself. You can hear it? Yeah. And you can all hear me fine too? Yes. Perfect. So welcome, Akhil. Glad you made it all around the globe to join us here today. Also with us is Sabrina. Sabrina is head of union at the German Institute for Migration and Integration Research. She's also a professor at Ruhr University, Bremen. If you can't hear me very well, you will have two options. You can listen to me in English, to us in English. You can also tune into the German translation. That would mean switching the channel. It's indicated by the colors. I forgot which one's which, but you'll figure it out. Welcome, Leonard. Leonard is an often seen guest on Republica. He's the founder of Momentum Institute, an Austrian think tank that focuses on concrete solutions for a fair and sustainable society. So I'm glad that everyone's here. Let's start. So what we are wearing today, and the coffee we had this morning, the very chairs we sit on, the technology we're using right now, all of that is tied into global multinational production processes in one way or the other. We've all become aware of the downside of this arrangement more and more recently. The downside are poor working conditions along the production chain. And today, we will have some first-hand experience on what that actually means for people, for one particular group of workers. And we will also look at the digital tools that have been developed in the last years and are being developed right now to ask, well, will they help workers to voice their interest and possibly better the conditions, or are they maybe even hindering that process? Akhil, I'd like to ask you first to share some of the experience you have with Migrant Forum Asia, and maybe start with telling the audience, tell us what we actually talk about when we talk about migrant workers.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Hans-Böckler Foundation, for this wonderful opportunity to represent Migrant Forum in Asia in this wonderful stage. We, Migrant Forum in Asia, is a network of grassroots level organizations, trade unions, and diaspora organizations and individual advocates who are committed to protect the rights of migrant workers in the Asia. We advocate for the rights of the migrant workers in the global platforms, the national platforms, and the regional platforms as well. So we are a network that covers 20 countries with around 60 organizations. And I would like to say a few things about why migrants are important in the global supply chain first. Unlike the other workers, migrants are more vulnerable in the global supply chain. And the question is why? Because they face the labor and human rights violation along with the citizenship, lack of citizenship rights. That makes them even more vulnerable in the global supply chain. And that's why migrants' issues are very much matter in the global supply chain. And by migrants, I mean in our region is the temporary labor migrant workers, the blue-collar migrant workers who travel through regular or irregular channels to destination countries for short-term work or on a short-term contract. So in Asia region, we have two major migration corridors, one from South Asia and Southeast Asia to the Middle East, that is the Gulf countries, and the other is to Southeast Asia, from South Asia and within the Southeast Asian countries. And the major category of workers, the blue-collar workers, are women domestic workers, the factory workers, and the agriculture workers, and also the construction workers. So these workers face immense difficulties throughout their migration journeys. It starts from the exploitation from the recruiters and the exploitation from the suppliers and exploitation from the employees as well. And at the workplace, they face various difficulties such as lack of access to services such as health and other basic necessities, and poor housing also, and they often face withholding of wages from the employers and other various challenges they face throughout their migration journeys. And there is no mechanism to address at the origin or destination countries in most of the situations. So I would like to quickly point out one example or a campaign that we ran during the pandemic. During the pandemic, as you all know, migrants are the most vulnerable category because of the repatriation experiences they had to face. They all face forced repatriation from the workplace. And what the employers they didn't pay their wages or pending wages or end of service benefits. So they all forced to travel back to their home countries, and there is no mechanism put in place to retrieve those wages, unlike the local workers who can go to the court and get the justice. So in that case, we Migrant Forum in Asia, with the help of a network of trade unions, run a campaign called Justice for Waste Theft campaign that you can see on the slides. So we are currently getting still, even after 2 years after the pandemic, we are getting numerous cases of waste theft, underreported cases of waste thefts. So I was trying to portray the situation of migrant workers to showcase that, the workers in the global supply chain are vulnerable and migrants are more vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Akhil. Could you explain a little bit, because you were mentioning the recruiters now, and that's something that I wasn't so aware of, that there are kind of more, there's multiple groups. So could you just point out a little bit how that works out? Like the migrant workers on the one side, okay, we understand that, and then there's the, employer company on the other side, and we as the consumers at the end somewhere. What role do the recruiters play, and why are they maybe important for your work too?
So recruiters/suppliers are the key component of the migration cycle in the global south, because the employers in the destination country cannot identify the potential workers for them. So the recruiters have a huge role to play. But the problem is that, they are highly exploitative. They charge huge recruitment fees, and they are deceptive in various senses, and they show fake contracts and fake salary certificate and everything to lure these workers to the destination country. Once they reach the destination country, recruiters close all the communication channels, and working at the destination country and returning back to the home country is everything become the responsibility of the worker itself. That is where recruiters' role is really important in the global supply chain.
Thank you. So let's look at the legal situation in which the conditions that Akhil just described arise. There's current developments that are quite promising. There is debate on EU regulation, and there's a law in Germany that's in action since January 1st this year. It's called the Due Diligence Act, and for those of you who love long German words, it's called the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtgesetz. Since January 1st, companies have new obligations that might help the case or not. Could you guys help us to explain or to understand what this new law is, and maybe shed some light on the importance and significance of those laws or this new legal situation in terms of the situation that Akhil described?
Yeah, thank you, Akhil, for sharing your insights. Let me just go a little bit back to understand the emergence and the rise of this new, I shorten it to global value regulation law. Basically, since the beginning of the 90s, when globalization exploded and companies went off to, in particular, the global south, in particular to Asia, to outsource production, we saw the rise of resistance towards the labor rights abuses. And labor law and labor rights are internationally regulated by the ILO, by the UN. So it's not that there's a legally free room. It's also nationally regulated. but it's simply not enforced. That is the problem. So groups like here in Europe, the Clean Clothes Campaign, and in Asia, like your organization, they try to team up and show those labor rights violations and target, first of all, the states where the headquarters are located in Europe. But basically, the state said, oh, well, it's not our law. We can't enforce or transplant any law from Europe to another country. They have to adhere to Indian law or Bangladeshi law or Chinese law. And if they enforce it or not, it's their problem. So activists, trade unions, social movements started targeting companies. And what we then saw was the rise of this huge CSR, as a corporate social responsibility industries, with auditing and monitoring supply chains. And so we saw the rise of so-called private regulation, which tried to fix and enforce those regulations. And basically what it means in very practical terms is that they hired auditing companies, like people going into a factory, having checkboxes and saying, okay, is there health and safety equipment? Is there sexual abuses? Works perfectly if you go into a factory and try to find out if there are sexual violences or abuses. Is there the keeping of working hours? And so forth. And basically what we found over the last 20, 30 years, it didn't work. It didn't work. So in the end, after continuous politicization and so forth, we saw now a new law, a new regulation, which started the beginning of this year, which should improve the situation.
So what happened, Leonard?
Yeah, so the German law and the debate that we're having currently on the European Union level is that the original equipment manufacturers, so the key players which are situated in Europe, but which are not operating the plants along the supply chains themselves. They are just, actually what they say is, oh, we're just ordering stuff. So it's not that we don't even control what these companies are doing. Yeah? So, and of course, we trust the various labels that Sabrina said, and what can we do? So there's nothing we can do, but of course they can do, because they have the power, because they also enforce their powers in other ways in terms of driving down costs. For example, what they do, they of course they are also liable that their products fulfill certain safety standards. Otherwise, they are not even allowed to import those products. And the question, and that's actually the main idea of this due diligence law, is that okay, if it works, if we can force companies that they cannot import products that are unsafe for consumers, and that's what we enforce, and there's a strict legislation. So why can't we also force the companies that they make sure that labor law is respected and that these abuses don't happen amongst the companies that they supply from? And so that's what the obligations that were mentioned. The idea of these laws is that the companies are made liable. And if there are violations, they cannot just say, oh, but these are just our suppliers. But that they have to take care. And in the European level, it's not sure whether we will arrive at a similar law as the German one. Yeah, but the German law definitely was the first big step in that direction.
It's only a German law, right?
Yeah, but we know that the headquarters of very strong, powerful, large, globalized corporations are in Germany. So they are already, and it's not so easy, even though CEOs often put pressure on politicians by arguing, if you don't abide by our demands, we just go elsewhere. But hardly ever they do with the headquarters, yeah? Because actually they like to live at Starnberger See, yeah? And they don't want to live at anywhere else, yeah? And so actually, and that's also why the German law in the end passed, yeah? Because to some degree, it is possible, yeah, to regulate large companies at the place where they have their headquarters, yeah? And that's and if we have it for Germany, that's already a first big step. But of course, it's easier to move around in Europe. Yeah? So the European level is of course not irrelevant.
So all German companies are now obliged to report on human rights issues and on sustainable issues, issues of sustainability?
Maybe we should discuss, and then directly connects to the topic of digital tools as well, what it means. Yeah. So basically they have due diligence reporting duties. So they have to check in their supply chains and then report about the status of human rights, and they have also to do risk assessments. Yeah.
But not all companies do. That's the point. Like even with the law that's in place now, not only very large companies in Germany do have these reporting obligations. Just to kind of scale it down a little bit. But Akhil, if you listen to that, if you listen to new laws like that, and in your experience, does it make a difference for your work?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I would like to say that the space for negotiations for civil society organizations like us is shrinking at the global level. Even whether it is at the UN Human Business Rights discourse, or with the other nations, or with the private sector itself. So that space is slowly shrinking down. And when we think about the impact of these regulations at the countries of, the countries of work, we could say that, there is hardly any impact because, they are not aware, because there is either no information or asymmetric information about these regulations in the global south. And the workers or the suppliers or other stakeholders are not at all aware about these changes. And I found that, there is a need, or there is a lack of a common platform by the countries of, the countries where the corporates are situated, and the countries of origin, like in the global south, and with other stakeholders like CSOs and private sector, etc. So, and other thing is that there is a serious need of orientation to the suppliers and the other stakeholders who are in the global south about these regulations as well.
Okay, so there's some hope in these new regulations, but we can't be sure where this ends up at. The new reporting regulations have created a market for vendors of digital tools that promise the help at obliging these reporting obligations. So, Sabrina, your research is about the working tools that are the workers' voice tools that are already in place, that are already used. Could you share some insight on what that means, what these tools are, what they look like? Do they work? Do they not work? What are the risks connected with it?
Yes. So let me first say, why are they there? Yeah. So there is, on the one hand, the continuous diagnosis of organizations like Akhil's, of other activist networks, that this existing monitoring tools are failing. And why? One important part of the diagnosis is to say, well, workers are not involved. Yeah, they don't know. They don't even know. Yeah, so we have to get their work, the input of the workers from factories directly to know about the situation on the ground. Yeah? And this goes hand in hand with the situation that since the last, 20 years, we find digital fixes for everything. So, yeah, there's always an app for that. So it means there was this huge business opportunity, which gets now a new push by this law, yeah, because it makes reporting compulsory or more compulsory, yeah, to say, basically we program an app, the workers get this app, and then we get the information from the workers, and then everything will be fine, and human rights will be, the human and labor rights issues will be solved. And that is the ideal vision of those apps. I show you one of those voice tools. We call them also digital feedback infrastructures, because which are basically similar when you book online on Airbnb or something, basically because it's not a one-way information flow, but you get all sorts of information flowing in both directions, and then everything is collected on dashboards, and then it's analyzed, aggregated, and put into reports. What kind? So basically in our project, with also Christian Scheper here in the room was part of, from the University Duisburg-Essen, is we mapped about 50 of those tools, 50 existing of those tools, and they are very different in many little tiny aspects, but in general they have something like workers' resources on it, where workers can get information about labor rights issues in general. Yeah, what are your rights? There are surveys, so they are posted on questionnaires and all about the situation in the factories. there are all kinds of news features, and sometimes there are complaint features. So it means if you didn't get your salary paid, if you had troubles with the line manager, if you were fired for certain reasons, maybe because you wanted to organize a trade union, you can file a complaint, not to the direct factory, but to some of the supply chain managers connected to the headquarter of the company. That is the idea of some of the tools. But what is also happening, and this is why those tools are thought of as the digital fixes or the quick fixes, is that a lot of them, or most of them, are directly organized in a way to serve the needs and the market of those multinational companies. Which, what do they need? Dashboards, informations to file their reports. And this is why for many of those tools, there are some grassroots which are constructed locally, but we will hear a little bit about them later. So one of the key problems is that this whole market for reporting duties is very much disconnected and continues to be disconnected, although most of the tools claim to be different from the workers on the ground.
Akhil, have you worked with these kind of tools? Are you, what's your experience with them? Is that something you can share?
Yeah, I mean, but there are very limited, private kind of firms running these tools in the global South and Asia region. But we have our own tools. We are trying for the last 12 years to digitally collect our grievances and feedback from the migrant workers. We have our own platform called Hamsa, and so we get regular feedbacks and grievances. We file the grievances and we use those feedbacks for better advocacy. So which works in a way, it helps our advocacy, but how much it helps to protect or empower the migrant rights, that's a bigger question, because we cannot, expand or scale up the entire exercise. That is a major challenge we face. And there are other couple of efforts from our partners. Those are trade unions and CSO networks. And those are basically rate and review platforms that review the employers and recruiters. And also there are feedback platforms. These platforms are multilingual, and some of these platforms works really well. They use signs instead of letters to collect feedback from the workers. In that sense, it works well. As I said in the beginning, we find it very difficult to scale up because there is no support either from the governments or from the suppliers or from the business persons to expand the platforms to a bigger scale. And most importantly, the challenge we face is the lack of digital literacy. Where before we even think about, setting up a digital tool in the global South, we should understand how bad is our digital literacy. They may all own a smartphone. The workers in the Middle East, the workers in Southeast Asia, they may all own a smartphone. They only use it to play YouTube, some videos, and sometimes they use to call their family members through WhatsApp or other platforms through video call. Apart from that, they don't use it for anything else. And that is the situation of workers, the digital literacy in the global South. And another problem is access to internet. You may all know that how bad is the internet access in the Middle East. They can't use WhatsApp, they can't use Signal, they can't use any of these platforms, basic platforms for workers. And the blue-collar workers cannot afford any of these VPN and buy a VPN every month to facilitate this. So when we thinking about expanding or setting up digital tools to empower the workers, right, we should keep in mind we have very basic digital literacy and we have very limited access to the internet. Thank you.
So Sabrina, so when we hear about, well, the obstacles that a grassroots organization that tries to form a platform, a feedback platform for themselves face, what does that mean for the market of digital tools out there? Do the companies face the same obstacles, or is it just easier for them? Or to put this question differently, is there a chance in it as still, even though the obstacles are like they are?
So what we did when we analyzed the 50 different tools we were looking at, we made sort of distinction according to different logics on how they were structured and how they were thinking about the issue when programming it. Yeah? Basic distinction is business orientation and workers orientation. So the grassroots tools, the more civil society oriented tools, like Akil described, they have a very different perspective. They really try to think of all those problems connected with the workers. Yeah? How to reach them, how can we connect with them, how can we create collectivity. Yeah? And digital tools are just one tool in parts of all kinds of initiatives you were talking about, and they make a small piece of the puzzle. The business-oriented tools I was talking about, they claim to have the same, to address maybe the same issues, and they are good-willing people, yeah? They do want to address these issues, but their main logic behind this is on how do I get into this market and how do I scale up, yeah? The question of scalability is a huge thing. If I want to economize, I have to get money, funding, and I have to get the funding from the global companies, and then I'm settled. Yeah, if I have a couple of those global players, I'm settled. So I have to design it in a way it very well fits to the corporates' reporting systems, duties, and their own digital feedback infrastructures and cloud solutions they are now establishing along the whole value chains, and how I can integrate that. So they are completely different logics, and although the intention good, they are very different in types of structure, intention, even the design, the functionality, language systems, and so forth.
So we've heard something about digital tools that are pretty much focused on communication and that use technology and that use technology that we are all kind of aware of. And even though there are obstacles, it's quite easy to understand, I think, what they're trying to do. Leonard, what you're focusing on in your research that you conducted in the same research bundle as Sabrina, financed by the Hans-Böckler Foundation, you focus on something very different, the algorithmic prediction tools. Could you tell us what they are and how they fit into the picture that we're describing here?
Yeah, to some degree, the worker voice tools that were mentioned right now, they suffer also from the same problem that, for example, we suffer when we want to switch from Twitter to Mastodon. They suffer from network effects. Yeah? As you have to bring people to really install the app on the computer. You mentioned that's a high hurdle. Yeah? So you get only a very tiny selection of people. Probably those who are already organized, unionized. So it's also kind of a bias in terms of who is even on those worker voice tools. So there's a lot of systematic issues with this. Yeah, it doesn't render them, but at the same time, they are at least to some degree, and depending on the tool you're using, they are focused on to some degree on the workers' interests. That they offer information. So the goal that these apps are programmed for is really to solve the issue or to address the issue to some degree. Yeah? Maybe not depending on the app in a different way. But what we also observe, and what has happened also before these due diligence laws already, but which is now repurposed and actually remarketed by actually not just companies themselves, but by third parties who offer these tools, are predictive risk analysis tools who promise to even predict problems before they occur, so you might then even act even prior to any disturbance of the value chain. Yeah? And that's what I brought you with you, and you always have to be careful to not take advertisements by data-based companies at face value. But so let me first tell you what the story that these third-party vendors of these analytical tools, what the story is that they sell also to these large companies. So they say, no, we don't need these workers to install apps, but to some degree they are using apps. That's on the left corner here. Yeah? So they are using maybe Facebook, they are using maybe even Twitter, they're using social media, then, as you said, they're using YouTube. Yeah? So these are the apps that they are using. And by, a miracle, that's called AI. Yeah? So what actually is machine learning tools, big data tools, you know, all the buzzwords that sell you products. What they actually do is they harvest and collect social media data, yeah, in certain areas, yeah, and then they make keyword searches, word searches, and they train algorithms, yeah, with historical data sets where they say, okay, what were the keywords that were used? Let me use an example that they show here, like a labor strike, yeah. And so what they do is they train their models, yeah, with social media data of prior strikes, of prior labor unrests, of prior protests, and then they try to predict, based on these machine learning algorithms, whether future labor unrest, strike, protests are likely to emerge based upon a current data set that they're analyzing. So that's kind of the way it works. Yeah? It's pattern matching. Yeah? That's what's actually happening here. Yeah? Then, and what they're now doing with these due diligence laws, they say, you know, that's even better than the workers' rights tools, you know, because workers, they voice their unrest, and, you know, early on, you know, before the shit hits the fan, you can go there and you can solve the problem. That's how it's solved. But what action, and you can, you know, act preemptively, yeah, so that people don't even have to do strikes, go on strike. But of course, that's only one way you could use this tool. And actually, what we also in our research tried to sensitize towards is that there are actually 3 ways. So that is the story that, of course, everyone likes to share. Yeah, that's the story that, yeah, so even preemptively, you might be able to care for the workers. But of course, there are 2 other ways that the information that you gather by these tools can have consequences. The second, and not even so problematic, but still questionable response might be, okay, there might be a problem at this part of my value chain. Let's preemptively switch. Let's switch suppliers. Let's move elsewhere. You know, the most important thing is that our supply chain is not broken. Yeah, so let's move elsewhere. Doesn't improve the situation of the workers, but rather might even worsen it. Yeah, people might lose their jobs. Yeah, but at least the value chain is safe. Yeah, so no supply problems. But of course, and the most worrisome issue that might happen is, and there's even a word for that, not just an app, but the word. It's called pre-pression. So kind of suppression, yeah, of workers' rights, might even, you know, trying to use these tools to identify strike leaders, yeah, and try to give this information to suppliers and in a way, use these tools to suppress workers' voice, yeah, in a way. And of course, no one would say, yes, we're doing that. Yeah? No one would put this into a CSR report. Yeah? But there's already indications that companies might already do that, yeah? That the tools can be used in such a manner. Yeah? And so actually this might create an additional risk even. Yeah? Even so you, on the one hand, you can use the tool, write it in your due diligence report, yeah? And say, you know, we use this tool, it's great, you know, so we are proactively, we are not just waiting for the workers using the workers' voice tools, we are proactively looking for problems. And at the same time, you might use this to rearrange your supply chains in a ways that you get rid of problematic suppliers, yeah, and then you might even suppress strike leaders. And so I would say that's the issue that we are facing here. And so these tools, they are already on the market. So it's not something that might be possible, yeah, but that's already been done. And I think from a perspective of both also regulation, yeah, but also from workers, from unions, from activists, there's the question, yeah, can you use these tools even for your kind of as a counter-surveillance technique or tactic? But I think we are very much at the beginning here.
Akhil, if you listen to Leonard's analysis, can you relate to that? Are there experience of MFA that you can tell us about in that context?
So as he rightly pointed out, the global supply chain not just try to identify the problematic suppliers, they try to evade or avoid the problematic workers also. Because I could give you examples of what happens in India. Because from the state where I belong, is historically used to send workers abroad, blue collar workers abroad, and later on the literacy improved and the living standards improved. They started asking for more wages, and they are literate and they are aware about their rights, but they are ready to do the same work. the blue collar works at the destination countries. But the global supply chain do not want those people. Then they started recruiting people from other states in India where the workers are not at all, workers do not have any idea about their rights, they are illiterate and all. So it's not about, identifying the problematic suppliers or something. So the global supply chain always want the workers who do not have any idea about their rights and digital literacy, etc. And one more thing to add, it's well and good. I mean, these attempts we should really appreciate from a perspective of a business that, they try to identify, the pre-pressure thing is very important from their perspective. But do you think, this AI could really address this diversity or diverse nature of the workers? Because for example, in the Middle East, every companies will say that, African workers. Each African country or each state is really different. And the nature of their strike protest is different. And how they see the labor rights is different. How they react at the workplace is different. And same with India and many other South Asian states also. So I don't think in the near future with the techniques or the AI techniques that are put in place right now, they can resolve this diversity question with any immediate effect. Yeah.
And so you were just explaining that even without AI tools, even without prediction tools, if in the global supply chain a risk only like people getting aware of their rights or maybe possibly communicating about their rights might lead to them losing the job or a whole region being like on the red list. So that's something that happened even without the algorithmic prediction tools, right? So now if you think about what Leona just described about the change like that, is that something that you've encountered already, or is that something that you think you will encounter anytime soon?
We do not have any kind of first-hand information about what is happening at the other end, to be very honest. But we only hear about this AI machine learning tools and all from the global platforms or the regional platforms we have. When we sit with the governments, the private sectors, for example, we have this Abu Dhabi Dialogue and Colombo process where all these stakeholders come together and discuss. Then only we hear that the business are trying to do all these things. Apart from that, CSOs are not at all aware about these things, and we have never encountered, we are yet to encounter the impacts of AI or machine learning.
We've heard that there is technology in place that might, and there are laws in place that might help workers to voice their interest, to connect, and to ultimately better their working conditions. But as so often with technology, is not decided in the programming itself to which end it can be used. We've heard from all of you that there are things that couldn't be decided, that we are on the brim of kind of changing, or something is changing. There's actors in place in Southeast Asia, well connected, really know their stuff, ready to help people on the ground, to support activism there. You've told us about the tools and the legal situation, whereas also there is some possibility in it. So before we then go into the Q&A, which I ask the audience to already think about, maybe share some, if we look at, so what can we do? So is there something we can do as a global community, or maybe as a community, a digital society that meets at a place like Republica? What should we think about?
First of all, let me say particularly these predictive tools. Yeah, so it can be even worse because they predict something, and organizations might proactively do something that might have never had happened. Yeah, that's the problem with any pre-crime analysis in predictive policing as well. So it's really very new ethical questions that are already in place here. Yeah, so how can you you react to something that might have never happened? Yeah, based upon high levels of insecurity. And so I think the first thing is, of course, we have in German co-determination laws, for example, a regulation that no data collection and data surveillance measures, database surveillance measures, are allowed to be implemented without consent of the workers. So these are some of the strongest rights that we have, actually, so that workers' representatives, they have to not just be informed, but sometimes they even have veto rights. Yeah? And I think this is something that we need to also make part of this due diligence regulation. So it's not just about reporting, but it's about co-determination. You have to involve the workers before you are allowed to really use that. So yesterday there was a talk by Jürgen Geuter, Tante, on Twitter, where he said, AI is not inevitable. Yeah? It's possible to rules to really forbid certain types of use, or to at least require co-determination. So that's one thing on the regulatory side. On the other side, I think, from a union side, for example, I think it's important to really educate ourselves about these tools, and you might even also, and you might at least collaboratively also use those tools to get your own stream of information, to not be dependent on the headquarters, and to also monitor yourself social media in that way, to, for example, where it's important to send people to mobilize, to organize. Yeah? What are opportunities also for organizing? Yeah? What are opportunities for protest? Yeah? But this is, the problem here is of course similar to what Akhil mentioned before. These tools are made with corporate buyers in mind, and not with not so well-funded civil society organizations or unions in mind. And so again, I think it's very important to also have kind of hacktivism in this regard. Yeah, to team up with activist hackers, programmers, to develop digital capabilities from the labor side. That's important.
Yeah, and really connect and look for the exchange with local organizations, workers, and trade unionists in particular, to prevent. To pre-strike the predictive risk analysis, because what's really happening is, you said social media, but they are also stealing, or web scraping all the NGO data and trade union data for assessing, certainly trying to turn collective organizing into a risk. Yeah? Or worker voice tools try to show, make complaints, make your problems visible. Yeah? It will be turned into a predictive risk using those complaints and say, okay, this region complained, oh well, we leave them alone and we go somewhere else. So it's really an instrument to bypass workers organizing, civil society, completely without the knowledge. Yeah? They are taking your data, they are taking the data you need to help workers, put them into the programs, and then try to screw people over. So there needs to be really some pushes against those tools.
Yeah, I mean, the question of data is another big thing. I mean, some of our efforts in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, there are often contacts by the suppliers or the companies, to share the data, and why can't we work together to import the migrant rights, etc. So we have never fell into that trap. But I'm trying to be very optimistic. It's not too late to identify or to foster partnerships. It's not something should come from above, and the suppliers or the workers should follow that, and we should find a middle term where the CSOs and all other actors, stakeholders could think on a similar line, and to identify on how we can effectively use AI. There'll be definitely use of AI and other tools, so we can't prevent that. So we should think about a partnership or a common ground where we all can think about how effectively we can protect the migrant rights in the time of AI. That is what I think, and my thoughts may be little new for the crowd, because I come from the global south and workers perspective. I don't know how many of you are aware about these things. I hope you align with my thoughts, and really looking forward to your comments in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what are your impulses, your reactions to what you heard, to maybe Akhil's experiences? There's microphones right and left, standing mics, and I think you just start speaking, right? Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Jill from Cologne. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for everything you shared with us. I wanted to ask if this is part of due diligence, using this tool, for example, if corporations profit from using this tool even to act like they care for workers' rights, wouldn't that be the easiest thing to change so that this at least would not be a plus for corporations to use this stuff? I mean, they could still use it, and they will, but maybe this would be the first little step. Thank you.
May I respond? So the problem really is, and as Sabrina also mentioned, the due diligence laws, they are primarily requiring organizations to report. Yeah? And so they have to collect data. And so they have to do the report in some way. And actually, I myself find it difficult, to say, no, you're not allowed to use digital tools. How else would you collect the data today? Yeah? So, and then, use no predictive tools. But then, so what I think just saying you have to report, but you're not allowed to collect the data, that's difficult. Yeah? So therefore, I think and I think I'm not against reporting. Reporting also might lead. Reporting is not the solution, but it's maybe part of it. And so I think it's important to say that workers have to be involved, and that in this reporting exercise. And but so it's not about whether or not, but how. Yeah? And I think this is so. But that of course makes it difficult. But it's not so straightforward. Yeah? So we're not allowed to use predictive tools. Yeah?
Any other questions, thoughts, impulses? Please, for me, it would be the easiest if you just came up to the mics, because that way I can. Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Alex. Thank you very much for outlining all these tools as well. And I was wondering myself if there's not the question of doing this or not doing this. Is it more a question of how we get kind of a more process into a co-creation of this kind of product? Well, from different perspectives as well, from the company side, from the activist side, as well from the development side. So it's more about more a question of collaboration, right? Less than if or if not. Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I do have a very strong, it sounds so good to say about co-creation, collaboration. These are very nice words in the new economy. But in this whole topic, you never can forget, and I do have to say it, and I have to bring it back in, is capitalism. The power imbalances are so great. It's as soon as it's so nice to collaborate, and then the one, in particular sitting in Europe, tries to basically steal the knowledge from the partners in the global south and economizes the knowledge. Yeah, so that is a continuous problem in this whole situation. Yeah, and it would be good if, for example, the predictive companies, I'm always saying they are stealing the data. They hate it. Yeah, because we're only web scraping. We're not seeing it's free on the internet. Yeah, but you take the data from those NGOs and sometimes, for example, like organizations like the Chinese Labor Bulletin in China, who maps labor protests and connects. They get arrested for collecting this data. They get arrested by the Chinese state, and then this company makes profit out of this data. Yeah, and in this case, they don't even know. Yeah, but even if they give them some money and say, okay, it's nice, we fund you, it's still the money and the business is taken up in here. The value creation is here in this companies, from these companies.
Kiel, do you have thoughts on the vision of just a co-creation in these kind of tools, and if that might better the situation?
I totally agree with Sabrina on that. But again, I was thinking, maybe before 10 or 10 years before, there were like better spaces for non-state actors to negotiate and to discuss the workers' right, etc. Globally in several platforms, whether it is UN or G20, G7, all other platforms. But as I said in the beginning, that space is shrinking down and everyone is trying to be better off. And there is what is the optimal situation in which every actor is trying to get better off. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about other state or business. When they try to serve their interest, where we can identify what should be the platform of this cooperation. That is very important. It cannot be, a multi-country cooperation, or it cannot be a cooperation of a platform for business. And UN obviously should be an opportunity for some kind of collaboration. But what I'm seeing for the last few years, the space, especially in the UN Business and Human Rights Forum, the space is seriously shrinking. We had a long discussion on this in the South Asia Human Rights Forum last time. So, but we should seriously explore that possibility again and again. That is where the hope lies for us.
I have a question.
Thank you. Bettina, I work for Algorithm Watch Switzerland. And we had a very similar discussion here yesterday as well about where we were focusing more on workers in Europe, in Germany and in Switzerland. I see a lot of the same issues that come up in like our discussions on the European level as well. So how can we, it is also about power imbalance between employers and employees, and obviously in this context the power imbalance tends to be even greater, but there's some common issues. How can we address them in general? Because I think it's not about necessarily where people work, but the system that has negative effects for workers, no matter where they are based.
Please set up a global forum where you introduce and invite also people and actors from the global south working on these issues to Switzerland or to wherever, I don't know, and exchange, and share ideas and also share counter strategies.
There's two questions. Maybe we take those two questions just after each other, and then we can answer that.
Thank you. Firstly, coming from a technical side, it's really an eye-opener that how exactly this technology can go on a wrong way. But my question is regarding that we have seen in the CO2 emission that in the global supply chain, the whole idea of blockchain getting created and the data spaces getting created, which are not owned by the companies, but actually by the other stakeholders, civil society. Is it something similar which is happening in this particular domain, just as a query?
Maybe we take the second question and then we say.
Thanks. It's actually related a little bit. So I'm a reporter and I cover German multinational companies, and I talk to them sometimes about this topic. And one thing that they often say, as this gentleman said, is that they now have these blockchain-based tools, digital twins for products, where along the way people are inputting information about the product, so that at the very end there's this whole very nice record of carbon, social, environmental footprint. I'd be interested to know from you what questions, should we be putting to the companies to find out, just how robust that process is. Akil, you mentioned, for example, that there's a lack of digital literacy that might prevent people from putting in accurate information. That's something interesting that I can take back and ask companies about. So if you have any other things like that are sort of concrete things we can ask about how robust this process of inputting information along the supply chain is, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Akil, this was directed, or do you want to, you start?
But I'm not very familiar with the context you were trying to set in about the CO2 emissions. But I feel that, without or, with sharing the data, we have to find a way of how we can share the data that we collect of the workers with this other stakeholders, especially business. How much we can ensure the transparency. That is one of the most important thing that we should think about, because when we think about a worker giving a feedback about the employer, we should see it's not a black and white thing. For example, there are rate and review platforms. Even our own rate and review platforms we have. During the pandemic, we were asking those workers, how are you going to rate your employer? How good he was? That worker actually faced a lot of issues, like there are a lot of pending wages and he didn't get his end of service benefits. But the reply was shocking. What the worker said, yeah, he didn't pay me well, but he seems to be a really nice guy, so I'm going to give him 5 stars. So that is the situation we have in the global south. It's not just about digital literacy, but it's generally about the understanding and awareness about the system input in place. So we should start from educating not just about the digital literacy, but also we should educate people about their rights and orient them and give them proper and symmetric regular information. That is what I feel you guys should advocate at the company's level.
If I have to admit, I'm a principled blockchain skeptic in general, and if I understand. But so I'm not an expert on these specific supply chain reporting blockchains. But what's true for all blockchains is they're very good in preserving the integrity of the information once it's on the blockchain. Yeah, so it's very hard to manipulate. But no blockchain in the world can make sure that what's put on the blockchain isn't garbage. Yeah? So garbage in, garbage out is for a blockchain more true than for anything else. And so my worry would be that if you put that on a blockchain, that actually the question of an input, this will be will get much more importance, I would say, and much more an issue of repression. So what if these worker voice tools, they guarantee to some degree anonymity, you can do it without being traced back if it works properly, and I would say that might be that I'm not an expert on the specific blockchain tools, but I would say definitely what you get on the blockchain, that's the key point then.
May I add a very few very specific questions you can ask? We are talking about information here, information flow, but it's about worker grievances, worker problems, worker rights abuses. So really ask, how are the problems mitigated? How are the issues solved? How do you trace if the issue is solved or if just not, which is the major problem solution is firing the worker, getting rid of the problem, which means in the case of workers, getting rid of the worker, So how are you do you work with local trade unions? If there is no local trade union, do you work with a local NGO or any other labor rights organization? These are questions you could pose and deconstruct the idea of abstract working information flows. It's a reframing of the whole labor rights issue.
Is there any more thoughts or questions? We'd have time to take one more, but I don't see it. Not sure. Are you leaving? Yes. Then that's not a question. Then let me just quickly point to two things that you see up there. One is the website of mfasia.org, where you can look up some of Akhil's work, some of the campaigns and goals and complaint forms, etc., that he explained, that he mentioned. If you're interested, just check it out. There's lots of information on there. Also, the Hans-Böckler Foundation has just published a volume only in German, which is called Soziale Standards in globalen Lieferketten, which is published in Creative Commons license, and you can download it from the publisher's website if you're interested. There's articles in there from Leonard and Sabrina and some other smart people who say smart things about social standards in global supply chains. Thank you all for being here, for bringing up these topics. Thank you for joining us for the discussion. Thank you, Republica, for hosting us, all the tech people, the translator who did a difficult job today, I think. And thank you for the support in my team with Lisa Schrepf and Christina Schildmann. It was great teamwork to put this up together today. Thank you all.
And thank you, Lisa, for hosting.